now, Mr. Juhana Vartiainen. Yeah.
Yeah, and one comment can speak close to the mic.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to use your voice.
Okay.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you for inviting me. Good evening, everybody. Let me say a couple of words and some ideas about this as an economist. If we look at this climate change issue as economists, then we tend to look at it as a huge challenge or problem of collective decision making. And this is what a large part of economics is about. I mean, we study situations where a collection of people, it might be a country, it might be a village, and in this case it is humanity, have to decide on things collectively. And this might be very difficult since it's difficult to agree on courses of action that will benefit everybody. And and basically the economic message is very clear and is very simple and very much in accordance with Mr. Merikanto just told us. We just have to conclude international agreements, conventions on the reduction of these greenhouse gas emissions, and then implement them with well-designed taxes or carbon market schemes that then lead firms and households to adjust their behavior. But this is a huge task to agree on something like that. We have never, as a humanity, we have never been faced with a collective action problem of this magnitude. And let me sort of only present the three very humble thoughts, three individual reflections on that. And the first one is the following. I mean, now it seems that there is, in many countries, there is an increasing consciousness of this problem. And we have this ilmastovaalit, and in many countries people seem very concerned. So at least in some parts of the globe, this is very, very well understood. But still, we cannot really forecast, we cannot really predict the future, whether we will succeed in limiting this temperature rise to 1.5, or whether it will be 3 perhaps, or something else. But from the point of view of an economist and social scientist like myself, then I am at least as afraid of the social and political repercussions of these transformations as of the eventual natural or atmospheric processes. Since let's say that we don't succeed in this 1.5 scheme. Let's say that the temperature raises more, increases by more. Then probably we will face huge disruptions, as was here aptly described and analyzed by the previous speaker. Probably this will increase the likelihood of social and political upheavals and collapses. I mean, we might have huge migration, we might have economic disruption, shortages of food production, and all this might lead just to the collapse of democracy and free trade and the international economic order. And this is also something that we should really be concerned about. I mean, if that were really the case, then I would be more afraid of that, in fact, that even of the climate impact. This might be a politically not correct thing to say, but look at the last century, what humanity was able to do to each other. So this is as important as anything. Let us preserve our democratic institutions, the international liberal, the rule of law, the international liberal order, the international market economy. And this brings me to the other sort of related point, which is the following. If we want really to combat climate change effectively, let us not attach too many other political agendas to it. Now, when I try to follow with the climate change discussion in many European countries, which I like to do, I mean, I like to follow up what's going on in the UK or France, where I lived as a kid, and Germany and Sweden. It seems to me that different political parties really like to attach their own agendas to how we should combat climate change. So the left is more inclined to like state in, direct state uh, regulation to the economy, whereas the liberal or right parties are more inclined to think about market-driven means of combating climate change and creating the right uh, incentives. And my sort of very humble reflection on this is that let us try to be pragmatic and just combat climate change. Let us not start by wishing a completely different economic and political system, since that might, I mean, that's something that we tried to do in Europe during the last century with horrible consequences. In particular, if we think that we have so far been well served by the international sort of liberal capitalism that has really created our standards of living. And now combating climate change, according to economic analysis, it need not be a huge shock to the economic system. It will just knock off a couple of percentage points from our growth rates. So in economic terms, it need not be a huge upheaval to sort of establish the good path that was characterized here by Mr. Merikanto. On the other hand, if this leads to a disruption of the international market system, then the welfare cost of combating climate change will be much more severe. Uh, think, for example, I mean, if combating climate change needs will compel us to a lower path of economic growth, and this is what it in all likelihood will do. It will just knock off a couple of percentage points from our economic growth path. Then, of course, in order to minimize the welfare cost of these climate policies, we should use our global resources even more efficiently. That means we should deepen the international division of labor. We should have a more efficient market economy. But instead of this, I see many politicians in many countries saying, now we must end capitalism and we will just we must become more protectionist and we must limit international trade, which is completely the wrong-headed reaction to what we have. We want to minimize the cost to our well-being of this appropriate climate policies. So that was my other point. Let us not abolish the international market economy. My third point is a kind of self-critical point in the sense that it goes against the traditional thinking of economists. Namely, as you know, the economists mostly think of the human being as a rational and egoistic, individualistic being. And because of that, then we have, as you know, the problem of the commons. And the climate issue, the atmosphere is a kind of commons, like is the ocean. I mean, everybody who in his or her own behavior knows that my individual impact on climate will be just infinitesimally small, then I might as well drive my car and fly and emit as much CO2 as I want, since this won't change anything, so I might as well enjoy life. And this is what is happening with the world's oceans and fish, for example. And this is how economists have traditionally thought. And this implies, of course, that the correct way to combat climate change is to establish international conventions on greenhouse gas emissions, which will then be translated into environmental taxes and a market for carbon emissions. And this will imply that even consumers and firms that go on maximizing their well-being and their profits, they will then adjust their behavior, and then we will be able to achieve this 1.5 degrees trajectory. But now I'm told by many people that we don't really have time to design such a thing. This is a more pressing issue. And then I have been starting to think that perhaps when we look at the enormous attention that this issue now attracts all over the globe, even this tonight is a testimony to this. Very many young people here. We have all these manifestations all over the European countries. Perhaps it is the case that for the first time in its history, humanity will be able to act sort of voluntarily and spontaneously without these designed by economists tax system. And my very naive thought that I sort of propose to you is that perhaps the existence of social media, in spite of all the fake news of hatred that is spread throughout the social media, perhaps it has done something for humanity in that sense, that there is a sense of belonging together, and even free and individual voluntary action will be more important than before. And so let me just conclude then by pointing out that we will soon see in this country the publication of a very ambitious Finnish compensation scheme designed by my friend Antero Vartia, and this will ultimately be based on the goodwill of corporations and individuals, and that will make available a technology for households and firms to act on an individual basis in order to compensate their carbon footprint. So that was my third reflection. Perhaps there is a greater role for individual and spontaneous action than we economists have ever thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juhana. Well, this was an amazing start. I'm so glad we could put the two of you, Joonas Merikanto and Juhana